Thank you so much for everyone that took the time to join in today. I will do a simple introduction for myself before I go ahead and get started. My name is Cody Pritchard. I am a Customer Experience Manager here at JumpCloud. That is just a fancy way of saying I handle a lot of the technical process, whether it be pre-sales, post-sales, or even implementation. So I'm one of the guys that's in the trenches every day working with our customers and ultimately have a strong affinity in terms of the topic that we have today. So what we'll be talking about today is what I like to think of being a love story of sorts. And with that said, we're going to be talking about breaking free from Active Directory. And as it says in the parentheses there, yes, it is possible. So for most of us that have been around for any period of time, we're all aware of what Active Directory is. And so what I'd like to do next is just guide you through the agenda on the topics that we'll be discussing today. And we, again, have some wonderful additions to our conference today with some members of the Ace Payroll team that I will be introducing as we go forward. So as we look at our agenda for today, we're really going to begin with the story, the evolution of directory services. So we're going to be pulling out the time capsule, taking a look back through the glass to see where we've been, where we are today, and where we're going. And I think it'll be a really enlightening topic for all of us just to have that retrospective reflection and really understanding the constraints, complexities, and situation that we're in today when it comes to directory services. Next, we'll be talking about Active Directory challenges and solutions. So once we've really taken that retrospective, it'll give us a chance to lay out the cards then and see where we are today, as I had mentioned. Understanding what you need to tackle as an organization with that type of infrastructure, and of course, what types of solutions are available to you as you look at extending into the cloud or obviously some of the other complexities that are there. After that, we will be meeting with our wonderful additions to the conference at Ace Payroll, where they'll be giving us just a case study and providing their journey in implementing JumpCloud, in leaving the Active Directory landscape, and how that all worked out for them and some of the experiences that they had. And then toward the end, we won't forget about all of you fine people. We will be opening up the line for some Q&A. So reflecting on the slides that you've seen here today and the presentation that we're giving, you'll have a moment to poke any questions at us from a technical perspective or even a high-level perspective, just so you can sort of understand the content that we're having and obviously get a better sense of JumpCloud and what we do. So at this point, let's move forward. Now, as I had said, we're going to be talking about the evolution of directory services. So some of you may have only been in the industry for a few years. Many of you have been around for, a decade, couple decades. Active Directory has been around for a long time. So you're quite familiar with the oh-so monolithic configurations, the on-premise infrastructure. I even remember the days of the concept of a off-site backup being writing to a tape and then taking it to a physical location. So that's what we're going to be talking about today and really just giving you guys an understanding of what has led us to where we are and the solutions that we try to put forward. So as you look back 16 years ago, things were pretty simple. As I had mentioned, a lot of your infrastructure was on premises, whether that be your firewall. The applications were all thick clients that ran on the systems. The concept of SaaS was but a dream at that time. As I had mentioned, when you start taking a look at backups, you are using on-site file servers. For long-term storage, you may have been using tape backups and then shipping those off to, temperature, environmentally controlled facilities. It's hilarious to think about all of the different considerations you had at that time. Of course, it was very Windows-centric. Anyone that's been looking at metrics over the years remembers the time of 99% of all offices constituted by Windows. So if you ran a Mac, you were either in education or possibly crazy for a period of time. So that has changed a lot. We all know that now. But again, we're looking through this looking glass here. All physical systems, a virtual machine was, again, a figment of our imagination at that time. And, of course, even things like print solutions. You were tying through LPT or various other methods. But things are changing. Things have been shifting over the last 10 years in terms of the ecosystem, in terms of the infrastructure that we're working with. So Active Directory on-premise started to become a little bit stressed. You started to become managing more resources than you were originally. To begin with, you had the print servers, you had your systems, but as time went on, those solutions started extending out, even off-site, where I believe we'll be talking about this in the coming slides, so I'm going to keep moving forward. But during that time, we had the migration from server rooms. So, when we were looking at costs and budgeting for a facility, you were looking at air conditioning costs. I'm not even kidding here. This was a budgetary factor when you start thinking about hosting your own infrastructure. But as we started moving over to, as it is coined on the slide, IaaS, which is pretty hilarious to say, or infrastructure, or rather identity as a service, we started moving away from those server rooms. The overhead costs of holding one of those rooms was exponential, to say the least. Energy costs, the cost of actually having an administration team that is watching over those resources, managing those resources, and never mind the fact that when you're talking about physical hardware, you have a concept of aging that will begin occurring. So the maintenance starts to compound over time, and it starts to become a very expensive endeavor, and one that's very difficult to tie into Active Directory, especially at least in previous years. And then even further to that, software as a service, the advent of that was huge. For the early days for many people, when they were thinking of software as a service, it was most of the big names. It was the Salesforces of the world. It was the Googles of the world that people were using in a SaaS capacity. But that really opened the doors to a whole new world where, from a programmatic standpoint, people started thinking, wow, we can run software over the internet. And what a concept that was. But as you can imagine, the sprawl continued. So as you're looking at your Active Directory infrastructure, how are you able to manage your Salesforce? How are you able to manage your web applications or Google? It was not something easy to achieve. In most cases, you were looking at third-party connector-type solutions. And even then, in many cases, those types of third-party connector solutions were not even available, depending on what type of service you were looking at. So, of course, SaaS, what an amazing concept, what an amazing journey we've had, but being so on-premises for so many years, it really was a change in dynamic, a change in the infrastructure, and a huge change in the environment that has really begged for a change in thinking. So as we tie it all together, the result of all of this is it made us a lot more powerful as an IT organization, but sadly, it also introduced a heck of a lot of complexity in terms of the management. So the visual that you see here is really, just imagine yourself in the center there, and you see that globe sort of spinning. Well, it's probably like your head was spinning at the time, considering how you manage those resources. And let's be honest, in most cases, for a lot of organizations, they simply weren't managing those resources, if we can be so honest with one another. You would just run your Google independent. You would run your AWS infrastructure independent of your on-premises infrastructure. There was really no ties in between them, and there were very definitive dividing lines that were there. But that is obviously increased complexity, as I had mentioned. And as an administrator, I think most of us are trying to get to a point where we have a 360-degree periphery view of all of the resources that our users are utilizing, especially in terms of security, in terms of compliance, and, well, as I've been saying all along, let's just say sanity as well. All right. So this is why we're starting to think about different options. Because of the complexities that are in place with having an on-premises directory of users that you're then having to extend out. And you can take a moment to look over the comic. I think it's hilarious, but it really relates to us in a couple ways as IT people. For the sake of, this conversation can equate to many things in our personal lives, but at the same time, I think we all deep down have some sense of this or have experienced this at some time where we're sick of the constant maintenance and we're sick of having to patch things up. We want them to run, and that's why we've moved to SaaS. One of the golden reasons that we have gone to SaaS, other than just the ease of usage, is that as an IT administrator, many of those SaaS providers are going to advertise 99.9% uptime. What an amazing concept. But, going back to the comic here, it's like, sorry to hear that. No idea things were going so bad with your wife. And it's like, no, this is my life at work. And there's got to be a better way to do that, right? And that is really the basis for our organization, the basis for our presentation, and really our pursuit and why we wake up in the morning is to try to solve that complexity and bring identity back to a centralized managed point. So let's look at some numbers here. I can talk all day, but I think until you really start to get the visuals in your head, it doesn't click in all cases. And so today, 12% of businesses that were surveyed are totally in the cloud, 100% in the cloud. So consider that's about 1 in 8 businesses right now who have no on-premises presence whatsoever. And then as you start taking a look at some of the projections here from Better Cloud, the thought process right now is that by 2020, and 2020, it's hard not to think that aliens are going to be here and that, for anyone that is of an older age, hearing the year 2020, it's really stark to think that that's 3 years away. Oh man, I'm getting old. But 2020, 3 years away, they're considering that 50% will be all in the cloud. And even further, 5 years further down the road, another 70%. So start looking at that demographic and breaking it out, and that remaining 30%, less than 10 years from now, is probably going to be very federal. It's going to be very financial. It's going to be very, very high standard or Department of Defense type things. Everyone else, the security's there for cloud, and it has been for many years. There's been just a lot of negative connotation to that, whether it be from a marketing perspective or a competitive perspective, but security's there. I mean, there have been some major breaches that you've seen of the targets of the world, but I can at least say safely that we have never had a breach, and many of the large companies that you trust in from an infrastructural standpoint haven't per se had breaches either. We're not retail here. So looking over at the public cloud infrastructure market share, it's pretty interesting. So this was performed by Synergy Research this year, and it really gives you a good lay of the land. You can see how big of a bite that Amazon has been able to achieve in the cloud market. It's pretty fantastic from my perspective. Not to go in a deluge here, but to give you an idea of my early beginnings, I previously worked for a company called VMware before they even went public, and so I was in that virtualization space. I've basically been trying to chew on the concept of SaaS, virtualization, and cloud since the very early beginning. I have been eating up the gospel, if you will, and so seeing that growth is just amazing. And then of course Microsoft, they have grown their market a bit there. They've got about 9% of the market. IBM Cloud, Salesforce, you can see the rest of the metrics, but there is that other 45%, which constitutes a lot of the other cloud applications that you see out there, not necessarily fringe even, that aren't those huge major players. Now let's bring some reality to the situation if we can. We've talked numbers a little bit, but I wonder what the sample would look like if we took a look at the actual webinar here. So anyone that's participating in the conference, I'd love if you got involved. I just popped a survey onto the screen for all of you, and let's try to get an idea of how everyone's infrastructure is built out right now. So I'm going to take a moment here. We'll just take 1-2 minutes just start getting some responses populated in there. Once we have a good number of the responses, don't worry, we will share them with you. This isn't some weird marketing ploy where we'll sell your data off. This is really supposed to be inspiring to our conversation. This is supposed to be inspiring to understand where you relate to other companies that are sort of interested in these types of topics. And I believe Shane just showed those results off, or at least the ones that are starting to populate there. And wow, it's very close to what we were saying on the previous slide. That's great. So, I mean, we've already got 11 responses indicating that at least half of their infrastructure, if not almost the whole kit and caboodle, is cloud. And then when you see, it looks like, just to give you the contrasting side, don't worry, there's no names associated. I'm not picking on anyone here, but only one person has responded thus far that they're all on premises. So this is really great information to see, and is really telling based off of the slides that I was talking to before, in that the migration's happening, and possibly even in a stampede at this point. So it's only a matter of time before we start seeing a majority of the market moving into the cloud. Again, security is quite sound. Protocols and standards are in place, and some of the biggest companies in the world use SaaS. So that should be something to rest your laurels on, and just know that there's a reason for the stampede. There is a reason for this migration. All right, so I will move on, but we'll just highlight the numbers for everyone's edification here, because it looks like we're petering out. So we did get 2 responses indicating that they are full cloud. Good job to you guys. So 3, it keeps going. But as you can see, about 50%, actually exactly 50%, have either half or nearly all of their organization in the cloud now. So just, it really does, again, speak to what we're pushing here. All right, so we're going to move on, continue with our topics here. Now, we've taken the moment, we were sipping lemonade on the porch, talking about the past. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of great times, but let's talk about today. A lot has changed, as we have discussed. Let's really look in the face of complexity, look at some of the challenges that are starting to show their face as we look at these on-premises environments, and in particular when we talk about Active Directory. So I'd already alluded to you all a little bit about this already, but server costs and maintenance. Anyone that's been around for a long time and has been part of the hardware sector, this is something that's probably persistent in your mind. For those of you that are newer to the industry and just think that SaaS is sort of this old hat, if you will, you don't always think about these costs of having this on-premises infrastructure. And some of the numbers that are spoken to on the right side are just amazing, and really bring this into focus, I believe. So you have a server. It's in the server room. It's been there for 3 years, right? As it starts to move on to 5 years, the cost of maintaining that system is going to double. It's going to double. We're in the good age now where we have solid-state drives, so we don't have these platter disks that are failing. But guess what? Everything in a server is still, for the most part, a motor. Most of the fans that are cooling your CPU. If you are using, non-SSD, you have your platter, and there's a motor going there as well. And motors are susceptible to failure. I mean, there's a reason that you have to take your car in for regular maintenance. Things need to be greased. Things break down. And so this server cost and maintenance can really start to sprawl if you're not focusing on it, and something really to bring to the forefront. What are some other challenges? Well, we talked about that, back in my day, 99% of the systems were Windows. That's changing pretty dramatically. The next slide is probably going to be even more eye-opening than this one in that regard. But how do you manage your Mac and Linux systems? Now, there are what I would say quasi-solutions to managing a Mac OS X system within an Active Directory infrastructure. But being someone who constantly talks to people who are going through migration and have sort of been in the face of the challenges, it's usually not very pretty. The gambit of capabilities that you have in managing your Windows systems do not equal the capabilities you have for your Mac systems. And just to give you a sense, many of the companies that I work with, many are under the 2,000 mark. About 95% of systems, or rather companies that are over 2,000 employees utilize Active Directory. So many times we deal with the smaller crowds up to the 1,000, up to the 2,000 mark. And you would not believe the amount of IT shops that I've spoken to where their process for provisioning for Mac is pulling it out of the box, creating a user, handing it over. That is it. Not a big deal forefront, you leave for the day, you go home, you eat your dinner, but most of us don't like to think about the future is the thing. I mean, that's why we procrastinate. We want instant gratification. We don't want to worry about the challenges in the future, and when they come, they stink. Hard to wake up in the morning sometimes, right? So let's bring it into perspective even more. We're not leaving this topic yet. Look at some of these companies who are using Mac OS X for their infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, mostly end-user infrastructure, not the DevOps per se. But wow, the Ciscos of the world. Cisco is, top 3 manufacturers in the world when it comes to technology. GE, need I say more? And, IBM, Google, sort of speaks for itself. So this is not isolated. These are not the, my developers really like Mac systems, they're crazy. No, this is a change in paradigm that's happening and has been happening for years, since the advent of the iPhone. Once the Mac OS started becoming more attractive decision and choice for consumers, they started to take it. So it's not 99% Windows anymore, and, well, it's rather challenging to try to manage that. What else? Well, let's talk about the Microsoft lock-in, the rooting, the tap roots, if you will. So if you've dealt with Microsoft sales, if you have a Microsoft infrastructure, they're exercising good business sense. Let's not fool each other here. This is not my way of painting them as the bad guy. This is my way of painting them as they know what they're doing. But that doesn't mean that it's a good outcome for you per se. And so with that said, you have a very decided lock-in that occurs with Microsoft. In many cases, for people that I talk to that are really entrenched in this type of environment, their forecaster perspective is on the 5 to 10 year scale. Think about what you were doing on your computer 10 years ago. That is just a suicidal way to think about things anymore, because business is changing in such a way that companies rise and fall within the matter of a few years. Take a look at the Fortune 500. Look at how often those companies shift. And so part of the complexity here is that you get locked in. You can't migrate to new technologies. You can't change with the needs of your business. What else? So let's talk about geographic location. So maybe you're looking at expanding your office. Maybe you have teleworkers. Maybe you just have that remote presence, or you have a sales engineering team that's always on the road. Well, how do you handle that today? SaaS, of course. We've determined that a good chunk of the audience here is utilizing cloud in some way, shape, or form. So that's been an answer for a lot of you. But if you have on-premises, you're probably looking at VPNs as an example, some type of virtual tunnel to your internal infrastructure to access those resources. You're going to have an administrator that's managing that and all of the complexity that goes along with it. So there's a clear advantage for being in the cloud and not being tied to an on-premises infrastructure when you are geographically dispersed. And just as I had said, further to that point, remote workers and traveling, it's a huge consideration. Maybe not for every company, but I don't know very many companies out there that don't have at least one remote worker. And as a business entity, think about it. You have the opportunity of increasing your workforce and hiring people where you have a candidacy pool that is national, if not global. rather than just looking for the best candidate in your town. That's why people are doing this, to hit different markets, to be dispersed for coverage if they have customers of their own. There's a myriad of reasons on why people have moved to remote workers, and I see the trend continuing as we move forward. So tying into the on-premises presence is a constant complexity and will continue to grow in that regard. Security. I've talked about it. Cloud's there, honestly. We are there. As you look at JumpCloud as a solution, as an example, we have encrypted tunnels for every form of communication that occurs, whether it be on the user endpoints, whether it be our LDAP service, any of the services that you look to, even towards Wi-Fi and radius, all traverse through an encrypted tunnel. And the security of the on-premises is that, well, let's talk about password sprawl as an example. Here's a statistic for you. Most people only have a unique password for every 4 systems. So basically, you're going to have passwords repeating sometimes upwards of 3 times when you look at the average amount of applications that people have access to these days. You're going to have repeating passwords. And for any of you that are unaware, the absolute worst way that you're going to get attacked, the easiest way that you're going to get attacked is phishing, simply. I mean, with the security and encryption standards that we have today, they're simply going to just fish for a password, and once they have that password, they're then going to gain access to your systems. And let us not forget just the overall costs. We were talking about server rooms towards the beginning of this presentation, and I think we're at a point that even that we have on-premises, we've all, for the most part, evolved away from that. A lot of us are moving to AWS or different types of data center infrastructures, but you still have the cost of on-premises. If you're doing backups, you're going to have to manage that system. You're going to need to buy a new server system or repair it within that 3 to 5 year segment. You're going to need the resources to actually manage that and pay those people. There's a lot of cost that is obviously hidden in most cases because, tell you what, when you're doing the budget, seldom are you equating the number of hours that your representatives are using. Some people do, many do not. And just to lighten things up, another comic for you guys to look at here. And again, it's just talking about the burden that we have and how we try to suck it up. But at the end of the day, there really is a better way to try to approach this. So I had fun with the last one, and I think it'd be interesting to do another survey. Again, just to really get an understanding of not necessarily peers, but the other people that are in the audience here with you today, to understand how their businesses are operating. And I had mentioned, well, we're changing so much where it's not all Windows anymore. Let's bring that reality into focus here. And so I already see the results piling in. We will reveal the results to all of you. And, well, it's pretty interesting. Right now, we see that about 60% of the people attending the conference today have Macs in their environment. 2 of them responded that they're completely Mac, and then another 2 responded that they're more than 50%. So it's still growing, but again, we're not at that 99% presence for Windows. I would wager, if I had to guess, that the people that are less than 50%, it's 10% or more for their Mac systems. Sure, I could be proven wrong, but it's starting to eat into that consumer PC market, and it's something we need to be aware of and be ready to manage. All right, so I'm going to move along because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for our wonderful presenters here. So really, let's just talk about the solutions you have today. We've talked about the complexity. We've talked about the infrastructure. What can you do to solve that? Well, solution number 1, go with an SSO provider. That would be the Oktas, the Bidiums, the Centralized, the OneLogins of the world. And this is really at the application level. This is not going to be for system management. This is going to be, hey, I want to have a single password for accessing my Salesforce, my Google, my Jira, whatever that SaaS application might be. That is what SSO is, providing a one login solution to multiple pass-through for their applications for users. Option number 2, well, you are one of those people that is a Mac shop. What do we do? Well, you might be looking at a solution like Jamf, released by Casper. And this is a client management, so now we are starting to talk about system endpoints a little bit. There is a MDM element to this as well, but it doesn't necessarily tie into the application layer. Okay, so solution number 3, well, we've trashed on Microsoft this whole time. Let's talk about a solution that they have given, and that is Azure Active Directory. The crux here is that with Azure, you still need an on-premises Active Directory. So, if your pursuit here is to be cloud forward, and I am resonating with you in terms of internal infrastructure and trying to slowly but surely gut it, this is not going to create a bridge for you. This is going to be the routing. This is going to be the 5 to 10 year scope that I had mentioned before. Solution number 4, no directory. Crickets start chirping. And it's really not much of a solution, is it? So a lot of people use this with quotation marks in the air. But most people are doing the Wild West, especially when it comes to Mac OS X management. Solution number 5, Google Apps as a directory. Well, I like to think of it as a quasi-directory, although they're growing. And some of the shortcomings there are largely that, most of the time it is really just OAuth in terms of the actual authorization that's going on there. So it's a good protocol, but not a strong protocol. You're not going to be able to control your workstations. You're not going to be able to integrate with any of the on-premises environment that you may still have, your Wi-Fi, or of course any of the network elements such as VPN. So you can use any combination of these solutions, which many will have to use multiple of them, which are still, struggling in terms of the central control. Or you can look to us, a directory as a service. So we're covering the gambit. We're handling your applications. We're handling your Wi-Fi. We're handling your endpoints. Endpoints almost most importantly because users are the vector of attack that most attackers will go through. So you guys get the whole sense now. You really get a sense of sort of the different pieces that we touch, whether it be the application level, whether it be sort of your on-site that may tie into LDAP or your SaaS applications, being able to manage your Wi-Fi login so they again have a synonymous login for their Wi-Fi, for their local system, for their applications, and then even going to the quasi-directories, if you will, of the O365 and Googles of the world. We seamlessly integrate with those. So I really do appreciate you guys listening to my presentation piece. This is the exciting piece for me where I get a chance to introduce 2 of our guests of honor today who will be sharing their journey in moving away from Active Directory and of course utilizing JumpCloud. And we'll be asking them some questions just to get a sense of how it went for them. You'll see the questions. I don't need to spoil the fun. So without further ado, Andre Hobson and Paul Setti, thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe we can do a quick sound check and just make sure that you guys are able to talk.
Thank you.
Excellent.
This is Paul.
Hi, Paul. All right, Andre, Paul, thank you so much for joining. Again, it's our absolute pleasure. I'll let you guys do an introduction if you can.
Okay, I'll take this one.
Great.
So this is Paul Setti. I'm here with my colleague Andre Hobson. We went through a lot of the situations that were spoken about before. We had new remote offices, road warriors, and all those kinds of situations that everyone really has today. And we had VPNs all over the place, and we really had no way to unify everything to make it a really simple, elegant solution. So we looked at just about everything that was shown before, and mostly all of it, required some sort of on-site Active Directory presence, which we wanted no part of if we didn't have to. So we found JumpCloud, which, as you've seen, can provide that.
Excellent. That's why we invited you to here today. So, Paul, I really do appreciate it. I'll be grilling you with some questions, and you guys can really give your story. And then, Andre, do you want to do a quick introduction?
I'm the West Coast manager here, and Yeah, but the biggest problem we were having is we're technically one company created out of three, and we had three separate Active Directory installations that we tried doing trusted forests with VPN connections, and if something happened to the VPN connection or we weren't paying attention, it seemed it would drop and people couldn't get into places. So we were desperate to find something that gave us a central control so that it didn't matter when it was and where it was, we would be able to access each other's resources and assist each other.
That's great. And a bottle of Advil later. Just kidding. No, thank you so much, both of you, for joining. And obviously, you're sort of resonating with the conversation that I've had up to this point. And again, I'll let you guys tell your story, and we'll have some pointed questions that you can share with the audience here. So as we're talking about this, you already gave sort of a sense there in terms of the VPNs. But just for the edification of the audience, and maybe they'll have one of those moments of saying, that's us. But I'd like you just to describe what your infrastructure looked like as you were sort of going into this journey, as you were entrenched with Active Directory, and how you had that configured.
I could take this one. I'll tell you right now what the state of it was. It was completely broken. And we just didn't care to fix what had never really worked too well in the past, which was, like we said, VPN to VPN connections between offices, people's houses, it really wasn't working, to be honest.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you guys really fit into a lot of the slides that I was speaking to, and, VPN, you said it, that really is the solution if you are geographically dispersed, or if you have teleworkers. You're going to need to secure network access to them in some way, shape, or form for on-premises resources. So, but that's another management layer, and it sounds like it was creating some headaches.
And one of the biggest issues is that our entire sales team, especially as that began to grow over the last couple of years here, were entirely outside of that loop. And if they were in the office, great, but we had absolutely no control of them, of what was going on with their systems, or when they needed assistance there if they were outside of one of the offices. And the whole point of having a sales team is for them not to be in the office.
Correct. Yeah, and I mean, I won't throw your words in your mouth. This is merely an assumption, but if they were a sales team, they were probably utilizing Salesforce, as most people do or have for years, and so they were probably sort of at the SaaS layer as well. Usually even before some of your other workers, it seems like sales was really on the advent of that.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, I'm going to keep the questions coming here and make sure that you guys are sufficiently grilled. So you've already emphasized this to an extent, but maybe we can just sort of distill this into some succinct sentences in that what challenges were you facing? So we've talked about sort of the sprawl of the environment. What headaches did that cause you guys?
Well, when the domain controller went down, first of all, when you have an Active Directory infrastructure, it's not good enough to just have an Active Directory, one server. You better have a backup, because that day when your Active Directory server goes down, your primary domain controller, you're in deep water. So it was that. It was we're a growing organization. A lot of what we're doing now is less, in the IT world, is a whole lot less hardware centric. It's more dealing with, applications up in the cloud, assisting users, and,
sure,
this and that. So, it's like all of a sudden you've been doing this, everything's going great for a year, and, you're facing hardware again. So we just said, you know what, let's start. I think this is what everyone's doing. Hardware goes down, hey, let's start looking at the cloud,
Sure, yeah, exactly. What a perfect segue, right? It's like, well, we have an opportunity to build a justification here, or maybe a change in direction. And so I don't think you're wrong. And based on the survey results that we received during the course of this presentation, I think it's a reasonable indication that people are moving that way. Only a couple people were fully on premises at this point. A majority, or over half at least, had some presence of Mac in their environment, presumably unmanaged, although some will be managing it with Active Directory in some shape or fashion. So definitely, you guys were wearing your mud boots when the hardware went down, simply.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, in addition to that, being a relatively small business, as each of us were before we merged, we have a lot of Linux infrastructure, and we had administrative passwords there. So if something happened in New York at 8 o'clock at night, well, I'm still sitting in the office on the West Coast here because it's only 5 o'clock my time. I'd have to be trying to get a hold of Paul and go, hey, where'd we put that password so I can get into your server to try and do whatever there to try and fix an issue that had come up like that. And this gave us a single location that, look, I can immediately, if I for some reason forgot to assign myself, I can assign myself to that server and get in and start running on it.
I think you just gave me a PTSD flashback from a 2 a.m. on call that just flashed into my head. So I'm right there with you. So yeah, there's obviously some disparity there, and certainly helps us to understand sort of what was driving the decision. Well, great. So what, not to speak us up all day, what led you to the decision with JumpCloud? What other solutions were you considering at the time? And, we've sort of talked about the features and obviously why we think we're a good solution to go with. But what were you looking at when you started your journey here and decided to make the migration?
We were looking at basically 100% cloud-based. We didn't want any on-site Active Directory at all. No domain controllers, no backup domain controllers, no VPN into AWS to have it there. Just none of that. Just please,
Right. And it sounds like it's one of those things that's a long time coming. Yeah. Sorry, Andre. Go ahead.
No, not a problem. We looked at every single one of those options. We looked at, hey, okay, if we go out and get 2012, 2016 servers, and we'd need 2 in each office, and how would we get them to integrate, and all of that. Hey, if we go out to AWS and try and do this, can we get rid of having a server on site? Not really. Okay. Well, we went through and looked at every single one of the options that you guys talked about here, and I mean, there was only one option that gave us the level of flexibility and was purely cloud-based, and that was you guys.
That's great. Yeah, and it's great to hear. And I think that, again, you're saying what is on a lot of people's minds. And to Paul's point, you guys did want to go to 100% cloud, but it was probably a long time coming, right? Or at least those thoughts, or having those thoughts at night while you're trying to sleep and you just got off that on call. There's got to be something better that we can do here so that I can focus my time on new efforts rather than sustaining ones, right? So
exactly.
Great. All right. So got more questions for you. So we've talked about what led you to making the changes. The thoughts, the premonitions that you had going into it. What was the process like for you? What, good, bad, or ugly, let's just talk about it, and sort of how you got to the point that you guys are today at Ace Payroll.
It really wasn't difficult at all. I mean, if you can add a machine to Active Directory, it's probably about the same amount of time. So, I mean, it's really probably depends on how big your
Sure.
operation is. So, but as far as complexity, it wasn't complex at all. It was very easy.
No, and I mean, one of the biggest points that you guys have is you give that free account that gets you up to 10 users there. So, I mean, we absolutely took advantage of that and migrated some guinea pigs over, tested this on this server, moved ourselves over as IT department onto the system and started playing with it. And what we discovered is that, yeah, this was very, very straightforward. And the fact that we were able to migrate one of our main Linux servers onto the system so that we could take advantage of that for our virtualization environment turned out to be an absolutely huge asset, because that took one more environment that was a separate username, separate password, separate maintenance, and was able to integrate it that we would not have been able to do with Active Directory at all.
That's great. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that the process was so seamless for you, just in terms of the migration. I certainly feel the same way, and you know, I do a lot of implementations for customers. And if you've done Active Directory, you can do JumpCloud. Is the simple end-all, be-all of that topic, and we try to make it as seamless as possible there. And Andre, you know, thank you for sort of the highlight there, because it's an important point that we probably wouldn't even touched on in this deck, but we're free up to 10 users. We don't pay gate you on feature functionality, so get in there and try it. You know, the worst that can happen is that you decide that you need to look at other solutions to maybe complement it, or you decide that you're not quite ready for the journey. Either way, I'm sure you're going to get in there and you're going to see why the advantages are there, and why companies have started the migration path. Good. So it sounds like you guys are rather chipper and positive, so I don't think that there's going to be an answer that says otherwise. But what kind of results are you guys seeing from moving to JumpCloud? And maybe we can even think about just your guys' time. Do you guys feel like you have a lot of time that's bought back? Have you been able to work on other projects? You know, how are things going?
Things are going well. I mean,
yeah. How many hours a week were you spending on trying to keep your domain server up there, Paul, when it was starting to fail? And because I know mine was in the same boat, and mine wasn't having the issues yours was at times. There, I mean.
Yeah, I mean.
2 hours a week trying to deal with it.
You know, it was only a problem when it was a problem, but when I took it out, it wasn't a problem anymore. So,
sure,
you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. How have the end users reacted? So, you know, it sounds like the results have been positive for you, and as you had mentioned, it isn't a problem until it's a problem. How's the end user experience? How is their side of things?
They probably have no idea. Other than having to change their password, yeah, they don't really know that, you know, there's anything different going on.
The biggest bonus that we have gotten out of this is the ability to map drives across the board, and probably because we've got a couple of remote workers, their ability to have access to the exact same structure and us to be able to manage them as if they were in the office has been huge there. So we used to have issues with, I don't have access to that drive, or where are they talking about, or because, hey, East Coast and West Coast, we had different resources there. That has almost entirely disappeared because of this.
Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate you sort of walking through that. Just being conscious of time, I'm going to just go through a quick overview in terms of what we've talked about today, and then, obviously you guys included, but we're going to open up the questions to the audience just to make sure that we can be impactful for them as well. So, again, your guys' feedback, your guys' journey, it's a great one, and I really do appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
thank you.
Easy as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess it's supposed to be 1, 2, 3, but we'll say it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 today. But it is easy in terms of migrating to us. So you're going to go ahead and start with just migrating your user accounts from Active Directory to JumpCloud. From there, you activate your JumpCloud users via email. They will click on a registration link, set a password, done. You'll then begin integrating your applications, and if you choose to, your Wi-Fi access through Radius to authenticate with JumpCloud, again, to create that single user credential set for them. You can convert your Active Directory bound systems and users once you've reached that point, and finally, you're done. You are ready to make the migration and the move away from the on-premises Active Directory environment. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to chat with me today. As I had mentioned, this is your time now. This is no longer my time. And so we're going to open up for questions. It looks like I already do have some questions that have populated up here, so we will start going through them here. So first question that I have, let's see, and this may actually be for the Ace Payroll team. How did the deployment went? How did people log into the computer without domain controller down and gone? Okay, I'll answer this one. So we use what is called our JumpCloud agent. It is a little piece of magic in that for a Windows system, it's going to run as a Windows service in the background. In the case of Mac or a Linux system, it would run as a service daemon. And think of it as an enforcer of sorts that sits in the background and is constantly communicating with our servers. The great thing about how we handle things is that this enforcer, this JumpCloud agent that I speak of, is creating local users and local home directories, so users are authenticating locally while there is basically a management agent that is moderating over those users, making sure that their passwords are compliant, making sure that when you deprovision a user, it gets deactivated, etc. So if the computer is not connected to the internet, the beauty of this is you are not communicating with the domain controller. You're communicating through the agent to our servers, but authentication is local. So you have your executive on a plane, he forgot his wallet, doesn't have his card to pay for Wi-Fi. He's still logging into his system, is the great thing there. Okay, so the next question was, how would JumpCloud work with AWS EC2 instances and AWS in general? Many, many ways. We actually have a lot of customers that manage AWS infrastructure, and so very common, very, very common. So how you would do that is, number one, let's say you wanted to manage the user logins for, let's say, the Linux systems on the Amazon EC2 side of things. You would just deploy the JumpCloud agent down to each of those systems. To make life even easier, you could even create an AMI or a machine image so that you're just basically cookie cutting these systems out with JumpCloud already provided on them. Now, to make life even better for you on the AWS side, we also provide SSO for AWS. So not only can we manage the user logins at the system level for EC2, we can manage your user access into AWS from the management side of things and federate your user from JumpCloud into there. So not only can we manage those local systems, or rather virtual systems that are in the cloud, we can manage the actual application layer of AWS and allowing access and management into that as well. Next question was, what things work well with SSO? It's sort of a loaded question, actually. I think most things do, honestly, but it's going to be a question of user experience. So for SSO, I like to stop and level set with anyone that I'm doing integration with, because SSO is becoming about as big of a buzzword as cloud was, 5 years ago. And while most people think they understand what SSO is, when you look at the offerings that call themselves SSO, it's a very particular flavor. So we are moving to what we are calling true SSO, which is going to be the whole gambit. It's going to be the identity management solution for the system endpoints, the application, Wi-Fi, etc. If you look at SSO today, however, SSO for the most part is just the application layer. And what SSO is providing a user a portal to log in once to then have click-through access to their applications, simply. I think that's the easiest way to put what SSO is. So we have over 100 different applications that are in our SSO catalog now. And to make things even easier for you, we integrate seamlessly with any of those SSO providers that you saw on the previous slide. So if you decided you were with a different solution or wanted to make this a pattern where you're migrating over time, we can make that available to you. Next question is, how does local authentication work if you don't store passwords in plain text? That's great. So how that will work is, bear in mind that communication with the JumpCloud agent occurs over SSL. Okay, so the agent is communicating over port 443 from the system to our server, and so the reason that it's not being pushed in plain text is because it is moving through an encrypted tunnel when it is then being written as an NTLM hash on the target system. So the key here is that there is plain text, but it's moving through an encrypted tunnel. So we're not pushing a hash through the tunnel per se, but it is, again, that encryption layer that there is a tunnel that surrounds the information that's moving to the client and from the client. Now, as you look at other technologies, we have encrypted tunnels for everything. For Radius, you have the choice of either using PEEP or EAP-TTLS. In the case of LDAP, you can either use LDAP-S or SSL, as some people will call it, as well as Start TLS, which are both just mutual TLS encrypted tunnels that are created. Well, great. It looks like we're starting to wind down on the questions, and when you look at it, as I look at the time, we're at about our time box as well. So don't know if there's any additional questions that we have at the very cusp here, but otherwise, I'm going to be gearing us for starting to close down the conference here. Again, I want to thank our presenters that joined us today, Andre and Paul. You guys were amazing. Really appreciate you sharing your journey with us in moving away from Active Directory, the complexities you had, and of course in using JumpCloud. And then of course on my part, my name is Cody Pritchard. Again, I'm a Customer Experience Manager here. I hope I get to talk to you guys. So if you have any questions, hopefully you'll be reaching out to our team. And again, you can really just check out our free trial in that there are 10 users for free with no pay-gated functionality.